Greetings, Tezos Nation. Welcome to another edition of TezTalks Live. I'm Stu from the Tezos Commons. Joining me today is Tim Boeckmann, CEO of Mailchain. Mailchain, for those who might not know, is a blockchain-powered Web3 communication layer providing simple, private, secure, and decentralized communications interfaces that connects directly to your digital wallet. The Mailchain team has recently released its integration with Tezos, enabling everyone in the Tezos ecosystem to privately and securely communicate with any Web3 identities or blockchain addresses using their Tezos addresses or Tezos domains. On today's stream, we'll be giving away an exclusive Mailchain swag bag courtesy of our friends at Mailchain to one lucky viewer. If you'd like that lucky viewer to be you, keep an ear out for a keyword later on during the stream. And of course, if you have any questions for Tim that you'd like me to ask, please add them in the chat at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can before we wrap up. Hi, Tim. How are things in London?
Hi, Stu. Things are great. I think we've got our 2 or 3 days of summer happening right now.
Awesome.
And yeah, life is good.
To get us started, can you tell us a bit about your professional background and how you got your start in the exciting world of blockchain technology?
Absolutely, I'd love to. So I spent the first part of my career working in startups. I did French at university and came out of that and didn't really know what I wanted to do. So found myself working in tech and as luck would have it, worked for a company that was part of the Web 2 movement when that was a thing. And we worked with a lot of media agencies who were looking at standing up all these experimental projects. And there was a lot of ambiguity on whether or not they'd work. And people were sinking millions of dollars into these websites that you could sort of interact with a lot better. Some got it right, some didn't. And then over time, I went off and started my own startups. That took me on a path that led me to ultimately work at Amazon Web Services. And there I worked in the startup team. And it was during my time in the startup team where we'd go out and help startups in different industries and verticals that I started to see all of these blockchain startups coming. So I took a deep dive into what technologies were available and how I could help all of these builders trying to create their projects or protocols. And ultimately, that led me to focusing all of my time and attention on it. So I would spend literally every day working with hundreds of startups over the months, helping them figure out how they could deploy, run their services at scale, securely. A lot of them were on a path to sort of decentralization, but they'd start off with a centralized posture. And that just to me was where I wanted to spend all of my time. So that's where I thought that there's change coming and this movement is a thing.
Very cool. That journey, of course, led you to becoming CEO of Mailchain and a thought leader in the arena of blockchain-powered Web3 communications. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to start your quest to build out the communication layer for Web3 in the first place? Like, why did you feel like the world needed a blockchain-powered communication layer?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting origin story. I was over in Prague. ETH DevCon, it was DevCon 4 for Ethereum. And I was there working with startups, looking at what was going on in part of the conference. And after I think it was the second day, I was getting a good night's sleep. Suddenly I woke up thinking, why is nobody communicating using these addresses? They send assets, there's so many things they can do with them, and you've got all these really strong ownership properties, but nobody seems to be communicating. And so I went on an exploration to figure out how would people communicate if they wanted to send invoices, receipts, acknowledgements of anything happening, to contact people if there was a security issue on a contract that people had interacted with. And whilst there were a few sort of fledgling projects and some folks looking at the IM space, I realized that nobody was doing end-to-end sort of email type communication. And when you look at Web 2 and how people consume information, most of the time they interact online and they'll go to websites and then an email will arrive in their inbox around some of the activity that's taken place, be it booking a flight ticket, hotel reservations, buying something, signing up to something. And that means if you ever wonder where something took place, you probably start in your email inbox and it goes from there. So I had a very close colleague that we would work on a lot of projects with. So we would experiment together, looking at different startup ideas. We'd also look at ideas inside AWS. And from there, I took this idea back to him that people weren't communicating. How could we solve a challenge like that? And we started to experiment with Mailchain. It was an early version where we would send an encrypted message initially. I think the very first message was a full encrypted message in the transaction data that was sent across Ethereum. And then obviously the recipient, it was using the public key of your wallet address. So then you could use your private key to decrypt that. And that was really the starting point. And then over the next 2 years, that was in 2019, we built that out. Over the next 2 years, we sort of saw more use cases, more need for this. And obviously the approach that we'd kind of played around with didn't scale back then. So we realized it needed actually a totally fresh approach. And we drew a line in the sand, built a proper company around it, and went out to have the team in place, or hire the team in place that we have today, and make it a scalable solution, make it something that can protect users end to end with a fully user-owned data model, so people are in control of their data, and build what was needed, which was a pretty big lift.
And now here we are.
Yeah.
Now, we already have a pretty robust communication structure in place in the Web 2 digital world. You mentioned email already. There are numerous other tools in that system. What do you think is the problem with those existing structures, and why do you think that blockchain technology is the right solution to that problem?
So one of the things that we've always borne in mind when we've approached Mailchain is that we're not looking to replace email. There's a lot of great things we've taken from email standards, and we believe that they're great. For example, the addressing is very robust. It doesn't mean that it's very hard for collisions to be conceivable or take place. So in Web3, it's quite easy for people to stand up to existing name services that could clash. And obviously, we don't want that to happen because you get someone else's message. So we took those kind of robust standards and we brought them in. Email is not very good at verifying who sent you a message unless you're using PGP, which suffers from lack of adoption, and it's quite hard to set up. So with Mailchain, we wanted to make a very easy sort of experience for people to get started, but have Web3 native characteristics, such as being able to give people end-to-end encryption by default, being able to verify who sent you a message, and if it's not the right sender through the signature methods, then reject that message before it gets to your inbox. And then we realized that actually, whilst there's lots of email addresses out there, there's also lots of Web3 addresses that cannot communicate. So our singular focus is let's make it possible for all folks in Web3 to communicate. And we don't need to worry about the folks in Web2 or the Web2 way of communicating, because that works okay already. And then later on, we'll come on and look at other challenges that may be solvable through an end-to-end encrypted email solution.
Okay. So at this stage, how is Web3's communication layer being used like right now? And how do you see that role growing in the sort of Web3 powered digital future ahead?
It's extremely interesting because Web3 adapted in some ways because they had a lack of communication. So a lot of communication takes place via Discord or Telegram channels. And some people are okay with it, some people not so happy. But what we've seen with Mailchain is that there are a few audiences that really like to receive messages, digest messages from communities, creators. So, for example, what we've seen with Tezos is, and one of the things that drew us to Tezos was that there are so many artists who want to communicate with their collectors, and there may be no way to reach those collectors other than knowing the address that they own that piece on. So you can send a message to that, and then those folks can choose whether or not they want to get that message and read it and respond. So the creator communication is key. What we've seen is platforms who need to be able to tell people who have interacted with their smart contracts, but they don't know who these people are. So Mailchain makes that extremely easy. And then individuals who want to contact people who own various digital assets. We've seen some crazy things happen before Mailchain existed, of someone would mint an NFT with a message inside it and send it and hope that someone would then read it and respond to that. At least with Mailchain, there's a lot fewer steps, and you know that you're getting direct, and you can guarantee that that has been sent and will be delivered if that person chooses to sign up to Mailchain.
Very cool. We've got a couple of audience questions coming through, and the first one ties into the next thing that I wanted to ask you about. So we'll start out with the audience question and move back in. Mikey Does Crypto asks, is Mailchain its own protocol, and how does it connect to other blockchains?
Great question. So when we talk about Mailchain, we tend to talk about it as a layer because it's on its way to being its own protocol. So there are really three parts to how messages are sent. Initially, when you sign up to Mailchain, you register your address. And when you register an address, you get separate messaging keys alongside your wallet keys. So you never need to enter your private keys into Mailchain. You just need to sign that you own this address, and that proves to the protocol that you are the original sender. Now that you have these messaging keys, you can decrypt messages and you can sign messages. So if I wanted to send a message to Stu, I would go and look up his messaging key, I would encrypt the message, and then I would send that, and that would live on Mailchain storage for now. We are bringing on other decentralized storage providers later in the year, so that anyone can essentially bring their own storage, or they can choose between who they want to store their encrypted messages. Nothing is ever sent decrypted, and nothing is transmitted decrypted. So carrying on from that, once you receive a message, you go along and you collect that off the decentralized storage, and then you can store that in your mailbox. You also use your messaging keys again to decrypt that. So we've separated out in a way that allows us to go into any number of protocols using the Mailchain registry and keys, so that it doesn't matter what type of wallet you're using, what type of protocol you're using, so long as we support the elliptic curves that underlie it for that little proof bit, then you can use your Mailchain account and talk cross-protocol.
Very cool. So cross-protocol is exactly what I wanted to ask about. So you've made cross-chain interoperability a key feature of what you're building with Mailchain. And I wanted to ask, why did you feel like that particular feature should be a key priority for this project?
I think during all of my experience and time spent in blockchain ecosystems, there are different communities of people who, like, they find themselves, be it in the Tezos community or another one, and they tend to develop an affinity for that. But that shouldn't be a limit on communication. So if you want to communicate with someone who uses another name service outside of Tezos, why not? Why shouldn't you be able to communicate using your Web3 chosen identity? And we went out to essentially build something that would support all of humanity. And there may be blockchain protocols that come along that didn't exist prior, and we need to make sure that we're future-proof around that. So we believe that anyone shouldn't have to check whether or not you're using a certain protocol to be able to communicate with you. It's just an identity.
Makes perfect sense. We've got one more audience question to get to, and then we'll dive back in. Alex Dickens would like to know, how is Mailchain fully decentralized?
So it's not fully decentralized today, but we're on a path to get there. And as I mentioned, we've got the storage layer, we then have a transport layer, and we have a registry layer. So storage is the most important for us to get decentralized so that people can store the messages in any way they need to. Then next up, transport and registry will make it possible for people to run their own registries. So what that means is you have your Mailchain account, and that's So I'm Tim at Mailchain, and under that, you have a keyring of all your registered wallets. Now, we can't see that because it's an account that you own. So nobody can infer that your Tezos, your Ethereum, your Near accounts are all on the same keyring, which gives you another layer of privacy. But we also think other people will have their own versions of registries. And so long as a registry returns a messaging key and preferences on storage and things like that, we can decentralize that. And as certain technologies mature, because some of them aren't actually ready for us to go and decentralize everything, then we'll be able to get those out the door. But the path for us is total decentralization of all communication protocol.
Okay. Now, as I mentioned off the top, and it's really the reason why you're here on TezTalks, you've recently released Mailchain's Tezos integration out into the wild. Can you talk a bit about what the journey to making this particular integration into a reality has been like?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had quite a lot of demand from folks who were using Tezos and present in the Tezos ecosystem to integrate us. And I think there's a few on Twitter, and then we had a few through other networks. And certainly we've always talked to NFT marketplaces and the creator community. And like when you look at where the activity is in art, I believe probably Tezos is at least one of the strongest, if not the strongest out there. I don't know if I can back that up with transaction data, but when you go to some of the events and you talk to some of the creators who have been empowered by what Tezos brings to them as a medium, then I think that's extremely powerful. So it was quite exciting to be able to enable a group of people that we hadn't got to before. And then as we got a little bit deeper into exploring the technology, because I think I first looked at Tezos back in 2018, maybe, and then sort of didn't do much about it for a long time. So it was nice to come back to that and see the ecosystem that had grown. And as we spoke to developers and different projects, then it became like a really, like it was a no-brainer for us to bring on, because people have been here for a long time. They're going to hang around for a long time. And enabling those kind of communities is really important for us.
I understand there was a Tezos Foundation grant involved in the process of developing this integration. I'm curious, how did your team come into contact with the TF, and what part has that relationship played in making this integration happen?
Yeah, so there was a grant. We love to go into protocols via the grant route, because when a foundation sets up a grant program, they also align a lot of resources to that. So, for example, we know if we go in with a grant, we're going to be able to contact the marketing teams, the technical teams. They will probably have access to key projects. And so when it came to Tezos, we reached out via the normal grant program contact method, submitted initially a proposal that went quite deep on what we wanted to come and bring. And for us, it's always it's an interesting consideration that grant teams need to be open-minded on, because we are a multi-protocol project. And Tezos were very open-minded to, hey, what if this does bring more people into Tezos? And what if this enables Tezos people to embrace their identities more and be able to reach outside of Tezos whilst remaining around those identities? So initially, we submitted the grants. Then there was a bit of backwards and forwards on, is it the right fit? How does it work today? How sort of far along are we? And one of the really interesting parts of that was some of the upfront questions that we needed to answer as part of the grant work were able to be answered by teams that they would put us in touch with. So we spoke to Tezos Domains super early. We spoke to the Baking Bad team, ECAT Labs, and by being able to connect with all of those folks, and the foundation were responsible for initiating those, that put us on a really strong footing. And whenever we had challenges looking at the addressing, encryption, etc., we had a direct line. So it sped up the ability to build this integration.
Yeah, I realize we're in the very early days here. But what has the response been like to this integration from the Tezos community so far?
It's been really good. Um, One of the things that we sort of see, obviously, Twitter is where people spend a lot of time talking about what's going on in Web3. And there's been some great engagement. In terms of signups, the number of signups has definitely increased. We can't track much of what's going on in the protocol at all. We built it that way. So we do know how many signups have happened. We don't know whether someone's gone and registered a bunch of wallet addresses, because we prefer not to build that in, and we believe it's people's right to maintain their own privacy. So like the people we've spoken to are excited. We have an integration on tzkt.io, which allows people to click a profile link and send a message. That's been echoed around quite a lot. So yeah, I think it's been really rewarding to deliver something that people are immediately warming to. It's solving challenges. It's making its way into like the projects and the integrations. And for example, Tezos domains are going to be communicating through Mailchain with expiries and things like that.
Very cool. We've had another interesting audience queue come through that I want to get to here. Valentina Z would like to know, are there gas fees for each email I send?
That's a great question. So today, Mailchain is free. And for most people, it will remain free forever. But in order to make sure that we have a self-sustaining protocol and the right economic design, we decided that we would charge businesses and high volume senders. So we have this, what we call a public good layer, and you'll be able to send up to about 30 messages a day for free forever. But if you exceed that, or if you're not a human user, then you will pay micro fees for each transaction. And there may be a provider model where people roll up that so that you don't have to worry about micro fees and you pay some kind of subscription. But what we believe is enabling anyone to be able to send messages, regardless of where they come from, so long as they're a human, and to have access to communication that is private to them, because that doesn't exist everywhere.
So if I'm just using this to send a few messages back and forth with my friends, it will likely be free forever. But
That's right.
if I'm using it as, let's say, a marketing channel to
Yeah,
send out a large number of messages, then I would likely need to pay something.
that's right. And that maps to a lot of existing economic models that have been proven out today. So it's extremely de-risked. And as a marketer, you should be prepared to pay for a channel that is somehow going to yield you value back.
So obviously, the Tezos Foundation felt like this integration with Mailchain was an important one for the sort of continued growth of the Tezos ecosystem. But I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think an integration like this brings to the Tezos ecosystem in terms of its overall health and continued growth?
So imagine if you can't communicate on the internet. It's a very transactional place. You would log into a website, do your stuff, then go away, and you'd have to come back to it and remember where you did whatever you were doing. That's pretty much what we're looking at for protocols that cannot communicate. So you have to remember which platform or which wallet you used to buy something, interact with something, do DeFi with something. And then you've got to keep an eye on it. And then when it comes to either if you have to pay taxes that time of year, you've got to go and figure out what the hell you did and what things were doing at that time. If there are any alerts, if there's a security risk and you need to move funds or assets from a particular wallet or contract, there's no way to know all of this. And so what this brings is, like, it makes not only a multiplayer experience of a protocol, so you can start to interact more and have a little bit more fun, hopefully, but also the utility that comes with that. So you've got your inbox, which is a universal place to receive all of the messages, statements, any kind of information that needs to be communicated alongside what you're doing with your wallet. And that is collected in Mailchain. So that becomes all of Web3 all in one place. And then as you go about doing things with projects, if you join a community, they can send you a welcome message. If there's a governance vote coming up, people can tell you ahead of time and tell you the results of that without you having to go and check it. So it's no longer, I got to be proactive. I got to monitor all of my addresses. It's a place where things come in and you can be a little bit more reactive, which is how we tend to default when we use the internet.
Makes a lot of sense to keep that all in Web3 rather than doing some things on Web3 and then saying, okay, if I need to communicate, let's email each other. It makes all kinds of sense. So how can those already sort of involved in building and developing here in the Tezos ecosystem, how can they help you? How would you like to see this community step up in support of what you're doing here?
So we're on a path to integrate as many projects and solve their communication challenges. So consider us working for projects. We want to go in, we want to help people unlock those high value communications where they want to tell users that, you know, there's a new collection coming out, there's a new sale happening, there's expiries. So we build an SDK so anyone can come along and just drop that in. And in a few lines of code, they can be sending out messages to their communities. We're building the interfaces for creators. They'll be very simple. So we'd like to see more interfaces being built. We'd like to see messages being sent natively from the different platforms that exist already in Tezos, so that people can like the value of having a single inbox for a bunch of different communications coming into one place starts to really play out when you have numerous projects. And so we see that already with some of the other ecosystems we're in. And as we continue our journey with Tezos, we want people to get all of their updates around all of the stuff they're doing.
Very cool. This is all great stuff so far. I'm excited to dive in a little bit deeper. We also have audience questions coming through really quickly here. But before we sort of dive a little bit deeper, are you ready for the world famous TezTalks lightning round?
Yeah, let's do it.
Just before we do that, I'd like to announce today's keyword for the Mailchain swag bag we're giving away today. Today's keyword is !Mailchain. Enter the keyword !Mailchain in the live stream chat, and Nightbot will randomly select today's winner, who will announce before the end of the stream. Okay, now, Tim, it's lightning round time. Remember, there are no wrong answers, and this is just for fun so our viewers can get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Beaches or mountains?
Sorry?
Beaches or mountains?
Mountains, beaches.
Pizza or sushi?
Pizza.
Movies or video games?
Oh, movies.
Is this real life or are we in a simulation?
TBD.
True or false? Money buys happiness.
I don't think so.
Name one thing you absolutely want to do before you die.
I'm a pretty content man. I don't think there's anything on my list particularly, although visiting Canada is probably up there.
As well it should be. The last place you traveled was?
Denver.
Denver. In 5 words or less, how would your best friend describe you?
Persistent, constantly learning things.
Perfect. Excellent answers. This concludes the TezTalks lightning round. Let's get back into it. As I said, we have a few audience cues. I'm going to start out with those. Our good friend Kryptonio would like to know, are you planning to add a feature for adding attachments?
Yes, it's something that we will get to. We deprioritized it because there are many ways for people to send files in an end-to-end encrypted way. But it is something that's on the roadmap for a later date. Most important for us is enabling that initial communication use case as we travel through different ecosystems.
And Kelly Kaler would like to know, where does the data get stored? It has to be hosted somewhere.
Yes, it does. So we run all the storage today. And as I said before, everything is encrypted before it arrives in our storage. So we have message blobs that mean nothing to us. And then later in the year, when we bring on the ability to bring your own storage, you'll be able to choose whether you want to plug in your own IPFS, your own cloud storage. And to answer the question more fully, we store all of that data across geographically distributed cloud storage.
Okay. So as you've touched on numerous times with the conversation around encryption and things arriving to you as message blobs that you can't necessarily read, and they're only going to be decryptable by the intended recipient. Like, there are some problems in the current Web 2 communication paradigm that could really do with solving, especially around the issue of privacy. Do you think that users of these sort of existing communication channels understand the privacy issues that exist within those structures? Do you think they understand them but just don't care? Or do you think they maybe haven't been able to care because there hasn't been a viable alternative?
I think there's a lot of ways that we can take the answer to this question. And I think general users today, because when I have to explain to friends what it is that I'm working on who don't know about Web3 and who just show up, use the internet, and don't think about anything that happens behind the scenes, I think generally they don't know that it is possible for people to intercept and use their data. It is possible to use an entire mailbox full of data to learn something from. And the fact that if for any reason someone has access to your email, they can essentially get everything that you've ever done. And it's also very easy to spoof people, and phishing attacks are on the rise. So as people start to learn more about it, and I think you see it at all levels. So individuals are starting to think more about privacy. I think everything I've watched on Netflix recently seems to be sort of leaning towards conspiracy stories about privacy. Either that's what's been put in front of me, or it seems to be becoming part of the narrative that the next generation are going to be thinking about. You're seeing government initiatives. The EU, for example, seem to be pushing a lot of privacy-related directives. And then you have email providers who are doing a very good job about regular encrypted technologies when you're going into provider. So when you send a message from one account to another. So some things are starting to get better. Their sort of natural narrative and marketing is all around, and messaging is all around improving privacy. So I think people are starting to become more aware. And I think probably the things that are the most scary that need to be tackled are these huge honeypots of data. So imagine a platform gets hacked and someone makes off with all of the accounts, and it's all under the same set of keys. That's pretty scary, because it's not just an individual who suffers, it's an entire group of individuals, and there's nothing that they can do to protect that. I'd like to think as we progress, there's a lot we can do, and we try and educate other folks building in spaces that they can use a lot of these privacy technologies coming from Web3 to build fairly isolated, this concept of zero-party data, where the user is the controller of the data and they choose what gets shared, and ultimately somehow the keys are owned by them. And that piece is a bit clunky now for key management. And it's a real sort of hot potato when it comes to discussions around who should store keys. So we went for a model where there's just the Regular user looks after their keys, and they're the only ones who can either use those keys, or if they choose to use them in a way that's insecure, that was their choice off the bat.
We had an audience question come in regarding adoption, which is something that I also wanted to ask you about. So what barriers to adoption do you expect the Web3 communication layer and tools like Mailchain to have to contend with in sort of the quest for mass adoption?
So I think we've still got a long way to go on notifications, for one. Right now, you can get notified through your browser, but because there are no services that can sit there looking at whether or not you've got messages, because nobody except you can tell, if there's not something there looking at it, such as your browser, we can't get you the notifications just yet. We're working on safe ways to do that, and there's a lot under R&D at the moment. And we have a pretty clear idea on how we can deliver that, but it's going to take a moment to get in place. Then the next thing is interfaces. So right now, you just get your email on your phone, or in Outlook, if that's what you use. So like most office workers end up using something like Outlook. We've got the webmail interface, and it works on mobile, but we need to get embedded into like the native applications. So one day when you open up the mail client on whichever phone you use, then you should be able to, alongside some of the providers and protocols that are already there, Mailchain should be a protocol that sits alongside that.
So speaking of that interface, what does Mailchain's user interface look like? Will it be easy for people who are sort of born and raised on Web 2 tools to transition over to Mailchain?
Yes, it will. And already today, when you sign up, you see a webmail interface that you already know how to use if you've ever used webmail before. We wanted to make sure that, like, the reputation Web3 has of having difficult user interfaces wasn't something that we really needed to think about too much. So Nathan, our designer, has spent an enormous amount of time working through the user experience and onboarding. And the flow is really supposed to be something that anyone can tackle. I think the only complexity there is that you've got to save your secret recovery phrase, and please store that somewhere, because we can't go and recover your account. But aside from that, the rest is something that regular people are used to signing up to.
So there is a place for people who may not be familiar with blockchain at all in the world of Mailchain.
There is. A lot of people will use just their standard, like I'm Tim at Mailchain, that account, rather than register wallets, and they can start to interact with other Web3 applications. One of the things that we've been doing quite a lot with recently is magic links, or the one-time passwords that you can send through. So if an application uses that to send out via Mailchain, you can log users in, you can prove they own an address, and they don't need to sign any transaction data or anything like that. And so applications that support login with Mailchain can essentially just have someone log in with the head Mailchain account, the root account, and that is fine.
Okay. I had a bunch more questions, but we're starting to run short on time here. So I would like to know what's next for Mailchain. Like, what other sort of rollouts and integrations do you have in the works at this stage?
So we always are focusing on what we can do more in the inbox and make that experience better. So some of the things that I'm excited about that are upcoming are around threading and a better flow for being able to register wallets, and all of that is on the way. The decentralized storage piece is going to be a wonderful milestone for us, because it's something we deeply care about as a team. And then in terms of like the protocols, we have a catch-22 where we want to get as many protocols working with us as possible and support as many. But when you come into communities like Tezos, we also want to stay and go really deep, because there's so many applications that people are using. They're incredibly well developed. So like there's a lot more to come within the Tezos ecosystem, I think.
Very cool. As I said, we're coming to the end here, and before we close off, I do need to announce the winner of the Mailchain swag bag we're giving away today. Today's winner is Diamond Hands. Congratulations, Diamond Hands, to
Great.
claim your prize. Just email us at social@tezoscommons.org. We will request a screenshot for verification that you're the account owner, and then we'll get your shiny new Mailchain swag bag over to you just as quick as we can for those who missed out today. We remind you that there are awesome giveaways to be found frequently here on the TezTalks live stream, so keep tuning in. If you'd like to get in touch with us, our social media contacts can be found at tezoscommons.org/TezTalks. We'd love to hear from you. Tim, thanks so much for joining us today. It's always awesome to speak to the folks integrating cool projects like Mailchain into the Tezos ecosystem and keeping Tezos at the forefront of the Web3 revolution. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention or plug before we sign off here?
Well, firstly, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure
My
to
pleasure.
tell people and share what we're working on. I think probably what would be great is that anyone who's thinking about integrating Mailchain into their applications, come and talk to us. We'd love to help people architect where it's going to sit, how they can get the best flows for users. And we've thought about this problem a lot and tackled it with a lot of people. So we're happy to share our experience and help you get started with the SDK. And you can find us either through the Discord, or you can reach out, obviously me, Tim at Mailchain, or any channel that you see us on. So thanks again.
And presumably, most projects being developed here in the Tezos ecosystem could likely use a communication layer within their platform. So a pretty appealing prospect there. To everyone out there in Tezos land, thanks for joining us on the TezTalks live stream. I'm Stu from the Tezos Commons, and our awesome guest has been Tim Boeckmann, CEO of Mailchain. Now let's move on to the communication layer of the future.